I'm honored, and it's a pleasure to introduce Emily Lipinski, Pulitzer Prize winner, investigative journalist, a former executive editor of Chicago Tribune, and the former curator of the Nieman Foundation at Harvard. Brent Renaud, my brother now, and director of the film, and my name is Juana Redondo, and I am the producer of the film.
Juan and Brent first meet each other at Nieman and become lifelong friends, and that intensity I think you see in the film. The relationships obviously don't play out this way always, but that intensity of friendship is pretty common, and you look for that because you want collaboration. Journalism is a team sport. And so people who get along with other journalists are kind of what you want. You want 1 + 1 = 3. Brent is described in there as kind of shy and a loner, but what I remember about him was how utterly aware he was of that and how hard he worked at addressing that so he could grow up to be a journalist. His mom had gotten him a shortwave radio when he was a child. He told me once, and he used to listen to the BBC at night. And he wanted to be one of those people, but he was painfully shy. So he told me that he created a game for himself called Mayor for a Day. If you were the mayor, you had to talk to everybody, and he would make himself talk to people. That was the job on Mayor for a Day days. I love that story. I mean, it's sweet and it's fanciful, but it's also, he really wanted this, and he had to work hard at it. It didn't come to him naturally. The most fundamental component of being a journalist, which is being able to go up to a stranger and have a conversation, was hard for him, and he got there.
For those who don't know, the Nieman Foundation gives a fellowship for journalists in the U.S. and around the world, and it's a year at Harvard, fully paid. And I remember the first weeks, he wouldn't show up, Brent wouldn't show up, and I'd be, who the fuck is this guy? You're getting this Fred, why is he on time? What, he would be missing talks? And I was annoyed, but of course I didn't know him. And about a month into our fellowship, he calls me up on a weekend and he says, hey, I locked myself out. Can I stay at your place? And that's the beginning of our friendship. And I started to realize, and asked him, and he said, I didn't know how to find a place to stay. I didn't know how to buy furniture. I've been sleeping on a sleeping bag for this month. And then fellows would go out and hang out and have beers or go to a bar, and he wouldn't be there. So I started texting him and say, hey, where are you? He's like, oh, I didn't know we were meeting. So I soon realized I became this hook to bring him into. So speaking about, difficulty sometimes socializing, but I think what comes across the film is someone who's very compassionate, who saw the humanity in stories, who was very intense.
Yeah, I mean, where to start? I mean, Brent and I have, from the second I was born, Brent had plans for me. You know, my mom said he used to put my clothes out for me when I was a little kid and pick what I was going to wear every day. So I was basically programmed to do what Brent was doing. So I played soccer because he played soccer. I listened to the same music that he did. And mainly I never wanted to get left behind from whatever he was doing. You know, that was my mission, is to keep up with him. And that basically carried on into our entire life and career together. When I found out and heard about the speech that Brent gave at Nieman, which is what you hear here when he talks about having autism, it wasn't a surprise to me because, that wasn't a huge revelation because that made sense. But it was a surprise that he spoke about that publicly and that he felt comfortable enough at the Nieman Fellowship to do that in front of people. So I thought that was really incredible and just a gift for this film, because if he hadn't done that, I don't think I ever would have been comfortable putting that in there myself, because he's such a private person. So I really like that fellowship happened and that he had that space to do that, because I can't imagine this film without people realizing that side of Brent.
Every Tuesday night during the academic year, a fellow is responsible, one of the people in the class is responsible for telling the story, really the story of sort of how they got to where they are, and you have to answer the question, why do I do what I do? Which seems really simple and is unbelievably hard to do. And it's especially hard to do in front of a group of peers. Just a few minutes before he was going to start, he said to me, I've written 2 different endings. And I said, tell me about that. And he said, I don't know if I'm going to be comfortable enough when it comes time to talk about my autism. And I just said to him, you're safe here. And I sat there not knowing what he was going to do, and he chooses the path. The class was blown away. And it was kind of a coming out. And I think he learned something about reporting and sharing in the field when you're interviewing people and what happens when people open up. And that happened that night in a really extraordinary way. What do you remember about it, Juan?
I still remember that one of those memorable sounds is because of that. You open up to the public, to your fellows, you invite people. But I think it speaks to his storytelling. I do remember how he built that, which also was sort of like a blueprint for us to make this documentary as well. We went through his diaries and through his computer, and he had the layout of the sounding. And so I think that was, I don't know if he did that with a purpose. I do remember that night, not being shocked, just being more grateful that he did share that so personally, intimately, and that eventually made our class bond. I think everyone sort of surrounded him. I saw him flourish in the second semester, was more outgoing. He wanted to do comedy, and he did do stand-up.
I've heard hundreds of soundings in my time at Neiman, and Brent Renaud alone, no other fellow has ever said to me, you know, we should really be doing 2 soundings a year. We should do one the first semester and one the second semester, because I've changed a lot. You've known him all your life. What did you learn about your brother in making this?
It was one of those things when he was killed, there was like a calmness, and that doesn't take away from what we went through, but there was this calmness that came over me that was like, this is poetic, right? This is how Brent, it just made sense when it happened, and I think, like Juan said, there was these blueprints, and so you never know if people are conscious that they have a certain amount of time on this earth, but it certainly makes sense of how hard Brent just, always pushed with everything that he did. You almost wonder if he was in a hurry to do all this. So I think, when we dug into this film, it was 3 years of editing, going back over 20-something years of archives. But he was a meticulous note taker. There was breadcrumbs everywhere. There was journals. There was the filmmaking. And I did feel like he was constantly present during the edit. And so I don't know if that was his spirit or that I've edited with him for so long that I could just constantly hear his voice speaking to me. I even had a dream. I had spent like almost a month editing on the Somalia footage and thought I had done a good job on the scene that I had chosen. Went to sleep that night and literally had a dream where Brent was like, you chose the wrong footage. And I went back and I found that moment in the hospital with this guy talking to him, which to me is the best moment of the film.
He certainly was very generous. When I left Neiman, I decided to go to school. I didn't have enough at times for rent, and he just, don't pay me, just come and stay and live with me. But then after this, then you started hearing stories about how he helped one of his characters to get a visa to come here. Shan, he opened his doors to everyone to come and help, mentor many, many, many filmmakers, but he never spoke about it.
I wanted to ask you about the choices you made, which you talk about in the film, to show his body. Can you describe that a little bit more?
I mean, the decision to do that was just simply trying to make every decision based off of that question, like what I thought Brent would have done in each situation, and so we had talked about, I think it was in Iraq, we were going into Iraq. You see that speech there where he says, be polite, be professional, and be prepared to kill. That day as we were heading into Iraq was what, like, pretty much that moment is when those contractors were hung from that bridge in Fallujah and drugged through the streets. And a mission that was supposed to be a peace and stability mission for National Guard just instantly shifted, until we talked about, this promise to each other that, if something ever took place, you just don't leave each other behind. It's important for me to document everything. We can make a decision in the edit room when we get back, and they felt comfortable with that. So, and I wasn't sure if I was going to show it, but it just kept being that question of what I thought Brent would do. And also I felt like as filmmakers and journalists who, we've documented the horrors of war all over the world, why all of a sudden would I not do the same thing? And so I felt that was very important, but also, again, just to be unflinching and just keep, not sanitize the horrors of war and what violence and war does to people. Especially the image of Brent, I debated probably up until the very end of how much to put that in and for how long, constantly thinking about what I thought Brent would do and what I thought we should do as journalists.
I can't watch that. And especially that film, that photo of Brent that is laid on the ground, bloody, that the soldier took, because that's how I remember I left him. And just bear with me for a second now. And for a long time, I had this survivor guilt of what a shitty friend who left his friend laying there. So for me, that image always took me back to that moment, and I felt the guilt of I should have done more, but I was bleeding, I was already fainting. And I debated with Craig. I said, I don't think we should have that image. It's too graphic, and for me, it's a triggering image. But then speaking with Craig many times, I understood that point of view. I respected. I went back a year later because we found the driver, and it was a moment of coming to terms and bringing closure to the family as well, to see what happened in those moments after. The driver assured me that Brent was never alone. He was there with him the whole entire time. Later, the Ukrainian troops, which you see there, the soldiers came and evacuated them. And that gave me some sense of relief that I wasn't, that I did not leave him behind alone, I guess.
I really appreciate that the film ends by pulling out from his story and really putting Brent's story in the context of this larger, really tragedy occurring in the profession. This year is the largest number of journalists dead in the history of the Committee to Protect Journalists keeping count, in the history of their keeping count, so in a handful of decades. What's your hope for what this film can offer in terms of the larger debate about safety?
Anybody that is working in this field has probably lost friends doing this, and John Alpert and I, John must have watched this film hundreds of times. I mean, every single time Juan and I had a cut ready, John would watch it, but that was something always on our mind. Like, we knew Brent was a symbol for what was happening with all journalists. But I obviously did not suspect when we started working on this film that we would be where we are today. And when Juan started pulling the numbers, and we realized it was over 100 every year since we started working on this film, we just felt like that had to be part of the larger story. So I do really hope, and I was so moved, when I first saw the images of the Ukrainians, holding up these photos of Brent and honoring him. And so we just wanted to repeat this sentiment. And I do pray that this makes a difference. I pray it becomes a conversation, and that, we'll go to J schools all over the place, and that is our hope. that this speaks to the larger issue that we're facing, because it's not heading in the right direction.
I just wanted to ask the two of you, you said 3 years working on this. I mean, that must have been very difficult. How did you steel yourselves to handle this material, to be in an edit room over and over again?
Yeah, it was difficult. I mean, I had multiple therapists told me they didn't think it was a good idea, but you know, I can't imagine healing without having gone through this process. It just seemed, you know, like being on autopilot. Like of course this is what you need to do right now, and you know, and yeah, and so it was very healing. It was almost like very intense EMDR therapy of just going through everything that we had, and not just what happened to Brent, but I think, you know, 20 plus years of us doing this work and revisiting all of these scenes, you know, was difficult, but very necessary. I mean, I think Brent was always very stressed out that we need to update our archives and get them all in one place, and so that felt very good too to finally do that. I know he can rest easier knowing that was completed. But yeah, it was a very healing process, and I think, you know, it also really helped with Juan and I to work on this, you know, together, and yeah, I mean, you know, therapy is helpful sometimes, but honestly, like the relationship with Juan and working with John through all this footage was very, very healing.
I always say I lost a friend, but I gained a brother, and that's how that's the takeaway I have from this. It was hard, and I knew my role was to support Craig, but we try many things. We interview each other, we interview our therapy sessions, he interviewed me getting my colostomy bag. I mean, we tried everything because we just wanted to make sure we had enough to tell the story.
I have a lot of pride seeing my mentor up there and just seeing how he's learned through his relationships and everything. Sorry, I'm like emotional. Yeah, this process, what is there anything that you learned about yourself through this process or through watching Brent through that lens that you would like to take forward?
So many things. But I think, and I'm not going to steal Juan's line, he can say it because Brent said it so well all the time.
This is our motto now, that Brent coined that phrase, is we don't follow a schedule, we follow a story. And so that always, you know, it's hard with fixers or drivers because they're like, oh, are we done? You know, can we just wrap this up? And it's like, no, we don't have the story.
And I learned throughout my entire career with Brent was just that discipline and just to continue to push until you were satisfied with where the story was. And he did that right up until his last moment. You know, he was supposed to leave on a Wednesday, conversations multiple times a day. I think you got enough. No, I need, you know, haven't quite found the right interview. And that pushed all the way till Sunday, and he was killed on Sunday. In the edit room too. I mean, we used to be pushing up against deadlines with our films, and I would be like, we got it, this film, you know, we can't possibly keep working on this film anymore. And he would, he would be up till 4 a.m. every single night, just perfecting every single moment of every transition. So I think, you know, that will be the takeaway that we always have, is just that work ethic and just trying to replicate that in any work that we do moving forward.
I appreciate all for coming here. Thank you very much for joining us. We're here to celebrate Brent, and so thank you. Thank you.